Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Also, check out Off the Floor. That's our Discord server, $2.99 per month. Click on the link here in the description. You'll bypass the Apple upcharge. Go all the way through. You get access after you pay the $2.99 to 10 channels plus our exclusive stage shows that do not show up on the podcast feed. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. Includes Prize Picks. We tell you all the time, use the code 5 FIVE. Put down $5, you get 50 to play right away. That's right. Put down five and you get 50. Again, it's prizepicks.com. Again, prizepicks.com or the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. And again, use the code FIVE, our official fantasy partner. And now, today's episode. All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick on Five Reasons Sports. And today we've got Mike Vigil. You can follow him at Protected Pick. I've been following him for a while. He tends to cover the Phoenix Suns quite a bit. Podcast is called the Timeline Pod on Blue Wire Pod, so make sure that you check that out. Michael, appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on, Ethan.
I wanted to have you on because we've been trying to give two different perspectives on the podcast, and we kind of don't have the third. Um, and the two perspectives are the one that sort of I feel like Shams and ESPN has been talking about, which is Jimmy's side.
Hmm.
And of course, we're talking about Jimmy Butler here. And we've tried to present as much as we can, not necessarily endorsing all of it, but just trying to present it, the Heat side in all of this. And there's a third party here right now in the midst of this, and that's really the Suns and everybody related to that. And that means whether it's James Jones or ownership or even Bradley Beal, that there are a lot of factors that are
Hmm.
involved because Jimmy Butler can't get to where he wants to go unless certain other things happen. And that means a couple of people making concessions. The Heat deciding that they want an offer. They don't want Bradley Beal. We've established that. I've been told over and over, there's no way that's happening, that he's traded directly to Miami, even if he waives the no trade clause in the future. And then the other thing, though, is again Beal's option to not waive the no trade clause, which could affect whether or not a three-way deal could actually happen. And just before we start, I just want to go through a couple of things today that came out. There was some leaks, so to speak. I know people think that the Heat, and as I say today, this may actually post on Tuesday. So I'm talking about this on Monday night before the Heat play the Clippers. There was this report about how, and I think this was from Jake Fisher, about how Jimmy Butler, one of the reasons for the 7 game suspension was that he's missed some shoot arounds. I've heard that, by the way, over time, and additionally, wanted private planes to get him back and forth. And then I guess some folks on Jimmy's side thought that maybe the Heat were leaking that. I can tell you the Heat deny they leaked any of that because it doesn't benefit them to leak it because they want to open up the market as much as possible. They don't want to close it down to just one team. So they're not going to be actively trashing Jimmy Butler here. But they did have to talk to the league to make their case because, again, the NBAPA is intending, although they haven't done it yet, to file a grievance against the Heat for the 7 game suspension, which cost Jimmy more than $3.5 million. And so it is possible that it leaked from the league or from somebody else who knew what was going on. But I'm telling you, the Heat are denying it. And again, it doesn't seem to serve their interest. So that was kind of the news today. But Michael, this is what I want to ask you. Why do they? This is the core question for me. The Suns are having a disappointing season, obviously. They're much further back in the West than the Heat are in the East, simply because the West is more competitive overall. Why do they want Jimmy Butler so bad now?
Well, it's a good question. I think mainly, well, there's a couple reasons, I think. We'll start with the actual fit on the floor. I think the Suns in this experiment with Bradley Beal have realized that the fit does not seem to be what they intended it to be. Now, he was originally traded for Landry Shamet and Chris Paul. And if you think about that trade in a vacuum, pretty good. I mean, you gave up, Chris Paul wasn't really part of the future of the Suns. Landry Shamet bouncing around, not exactly a core piece of any team. You get Bradley Beal back. Originally with Frank Vogel, they were trying to play a bigger starting lineup, which included basically Devin Booker and Bradley Beal playing point guard duties, sliding another wing in there with Kevin Durant and a big. That didn't quite work last year. They got bounced in the first round of the playoffs, completely swept, didn't win a single playoff game. Come back this year, they signed a point guard in Tyus Jones. The
Hmm.
day Tyus Jones was signed, in fact, a few minutes later, he released a statement that he says, I can't wait to start on the Phoenix Suns. Pretty clear that one of the reasons Tyus Jones was willing to take a minimum to play in the Phoenix Suns,
Hmm.
they promised him he would start. So now they're playing a lineup that's insanely small. Tyus Jones not just, playing another guard on the team, a very small point guard, along with Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant. Just no real forwards in that. Even Kevin Durant, who's a forward, plays like a shooting guard already. So that
Right.
fit itself hasn't quite worked for the team. They don't have guys that are willing to be the defensive guys who are guarding the guards and guarding the wings on the other team. It has to be, Brad, or it has to be Book, and it's not quite what you want out of a team like that. And now they're bringing Brad off the bench. They've brought him off the bench for a few games. They're 3-1 in those games since they started bringing him off the bench against bad teams. Like nothing really to brag about there. But overall, the size doesn't fit. The overall skill set doesn't fit. Bradley Beal himself, holds all the cards in this situation. So that's there. But another thing that I think you have to look at overall from the perspective of the Suns is Brian Windhorst has connected the concept of Kevin Durant's extension to whether or not they can get a deal done with Jimmy Butler. And so if you're Matt Ishbia, who is the guy who is really pulling all the strings, regardless of who you want to point at on the team, we all know it's Matt Ishbia at this point. I think he's thinking, I get Jimmy Butler, I get Jimmy Butler plus Kevin Durant for multiple seasons beyond this season. It's not just trading
Hmm.
for Jimmy Butler. But I think overall, I think Butler would be a better fit in that he would be the best defender on the Suns right away. He doesn't shoot a ton of threes, so that would be a problem considering the other two stars on the Suns don't shoot a ton of threes.
Right.
But defensively, I think he would fit in right away. But I really think that Kevin Durant thing is maybe even almost undercovered at this point, because Windhorst just kind of sneaks it in at every opportunity.
No, and that makes sense. And when I heard Brian say that, I mean that does stick out as a reason that he would want to do it. A couple things strike me though. First thing, I don't know that Jimmy's been an elite defender of late. He may be better than the guys that are there,
Yeah,
but
low
they've kind
bar to be fair. Yeah.
no, I know, but he has they've kind of taken those responsibilities away from him where, they even put Haywood Highsmith in the starting lineup, for a time with Jimmy so that Jimmy wouldn't have to guard the best wing on the team. In fact, Haywood ends up guarding the point of attack stuff too when Rozier's out there as well, and Bam and him kind of clean everything up. So I think Jimmy still has a lot of capability as an off the ball defender. When we know when he's engaged, when he has steals. I mean, that's kind of the
Yeah,
thing.
right.
And so, but as an on the ball defender, I would say he's good when he wants to be at this stage. But some of the couple of other things that you mentioned stick out to me because you mentioned that Ishbia is kind of running the show now, and it certainly seems like it. It was funny because one of my co-hosts, Brady Hawk, witnessed a scene when the Suns were in town on December 7th, and he actually texted to me at the time. I was at the arena, but I wasn't in that area that James Jones, who we all know very well, he still has a place down here. I've known
Mm-hmm.
JJ
Mm-hmm.
forever, since he played at UM, and then obviously with the Heat. I even went up to Cleveland when LeBron went up there and spent a lot of time with JJ there. So I'm very familiar with him, and I have a lot of respect for him and the way he tends to go about things. But there was a scene. He was walking by Jimmy in the tunnel, and they clearly have a positive rapport. Um, because they were joking about who wore the number 22 better as they were walking by each other. And Brady texted me that at the time. And it's interesting because the Heat have kind of put some things together here. And I'm going to run some of this by you. And I'm not asking you to necessarily jump into the Suns' defense if maybe they did let something be known to Jimmy or his camp that they would do certain things that maybe the Heat were not willing to do at this point. But if you go back to that game on December 7th, there was also when Jimmy was in Phoenix, he almost never tweets, and he tweeted a video where he was telling the
Mm-hmm.
Suns fans, "I'll be back soon." I mean, he never tweets, like unless it's
Mm-hmm.
like a coffee pop up. He's always posting, emo songs or country songs on IG. And so that all of that struck them. And then there's also someone who's close to Jimmy who has posted a lot of Phoenix stuff.
Yep.
Ever since that game. I think you're familiar with who I'm talking
Yep.
about, and
Yep.
and even called Bradley Beal the greatest scorer, the two guard position of all time, or something like that. Which I think that Michael, Kobe, and Dwayne might
Yeah.
disagree. Well, obviously
Little
Kobe has
some light
passed, but
trolling. Yeah, I'd
some
say.
some
Yeah.
some some light trolling there. I guess How long do you think that they've targeted him?
I would say it's pretty clear that it's been a while. I don't know when, but I would say just the fact that Jimmy Butler knew that there was no extension coming, I'd be
Yeah.
surprised from his side if he wasn't already trying to find something out there. And let's be honest, the history of Kevin Durant in the league for the last few years is he seems to get the phone numbers of other stars and tries to recruit them to his team. Like
Yes.
I'm not saying I have no
Yes.
actual inside information that he did this, but like, I mean, pattern recognition is pretty easy to do here,
Yeah.
and I'd say there's a pretty clear pattern.
Yeah, there seems to be. It's also Kevin also knows the Heat organization very well. I mean, the Heat went after him hard twice, and they kind of feel like they finished second to Golden State in 2016 because Spo made a presentation that I guess impressed KD, but again, he wasn't going to pass up the opportunity to go play with Steph.
Right.
Not when the Heat situation was so much in flux at that point. I guess, and again, and then I know this comes back to kind of the criticisms of Kevin nationally that he needs this many stars to compete. And now it's like we're throwing Beal overboard to go get Butler. So let me get to the Beal part of this with you.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I know the Heat don't want him, and it's mostly contractually. I mean, they wanted him for years, and then
Hmm.
last year they had an opportunity, and I know Riley went to Mark Bartlestein, his agent, who he has
Hmm.
a long-standing relationship with. Mark was the agent for Brian Grant and PJ Brown and many other Heat players. So they probably have a longer-standing relationship with him than anybody but the late Henry Thomas. So they know Mark very well. He went to Mark and asked Beal if he would waive the no trade clause going forward, or asked Bartlestein after the trade to Miami, and Bartlestein said no. And so my understanding was Pat didn't even run it up the chain. Like it was just that was it. They were
Hmm.
not going to do the deal without him waiving the no trade. Now all of a sudden there's these rumors that he would waive the no trade, not just to go somewhere, but perhaps permanently. But then Bartlestein came out and shot that down. And I just want to ask you this because there is this weird connection here where
Yeah. Yeah.
Mark's son is in the Suns front office. Now his fiduciary responsibility is to his client, which is Bradley Beal, which is to look for the best situation for him and not in push him to waive a no trade clause that's if it's against his interests. And Mark is known as a bulldog agent who goes to bat for his clients, which is why he's been around for so long. But again, he got him to Phoenix the first time to play for his son. Uh, I mean, how do you think all of that plays out? And do you think ultimately, how many teams do you think Bradley Beal would actually waive the no trade clause? Because again, Miami, it doesn't matter because they're not taking him. So how many of these other, say, third teams in a deal do you think he might actually look at?
Well, we do have here in Phoenix, we have a radio host, Gambo, John
Yes.
Gambadoro, who
Hmm.
reports, and I'm sure you've talked about that on the podcast. He is pretty accurate in his son's reports, and he's named a few teams that he expects that Brad would be willing to go. He said L.A. I don't know if he ever clarified with whether that would be the Lakers or the Clippers, but I think it would be the Lakers. I think he
Hmm.
mentioned Denver and he mentioned
Yeah.
Miami as teams that Brad would be willing to go to. Of course, like you said, and the agent Mark shot it down and immediately, which, you know, that's probably what he's going to do in that situation. They don't want to give up any control in that situation. But it is I do find it to be a completely unique situation. The CEO of the Suns is Bradley Beal's agent's son, and you just know there if there's going to be a conversation there, they can have it pretty easily and pretty simply. I do at times it does kind of make me wonder who's calling the who's calling the shots here. Then if it's not this guy that's clearly at the top of the Suns right now, because technically he's even above James Jones on the org chart.
Hmm. Hmm.
Bartlestein in this situation. Um, and they did a lot to bring Brad over here. If it's not working, is it KD or is it just Matt Ishbia that's trying to push for this? It just makes me very, very curious. I think that the Suns have been a massive disappointment this year, and they have been a massive disappointment, particularly when Bradley Beal plays. I think there's been a
Yeah.
stretch here coming off the bench where he's been a little bit better. But
Hmm.
to make the assumption that Brad would make a change, I don't think would be completely out of the question just based on the way the Suns have played and how it's looked on the court. But the history of Bradley Beal says that he doesn't do that kind of thing very often. He continued to play on a team that wasn't very good in Washington. He was there for 11 seasons. 11
Yep.
seasons on that team. I
Yep.
think they won one playoff round that entire
Hmm.
time, if I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken. So his willingness to pick up his family and move, I don't know. I really don't know. But if you just look at the way it's played out for the Suns, now he's forced to come off the bench. From an on court perspective, it wouldn't be entirely surprising, but based on the history of Brad, we'll see. I mean, I guess we'll see. I think from the Suns' perspective at this point, they're out there probably looking for three team trades because all of the reporting has been Miami doesn't want him. So we were pretty clear about that. I think Brad's still a pretty good basketball player and could exist on a good team. This is just not a good fit for him. From the Suns' perspective, I wonder if they're looking for these trades, obviously for Jimmy Butler. If we're getting down to the deadline and Miami continues to say no, are they still going to make a move with Bradley Beal going and just take whatever the Heat would have taken in that scenario just to get off of that? Because I will say this, from the perspective of somebody who's covered the Suns this season, if you're a Heat fan and you're wondering why they wouldn't want a no trade clause, you don't want it. I'm having a hard time. I don't want it at all. I get why the Heat are just saying no to that entirely because it's just so limited. I don't know that a team will ever give one out again. Obviously, LeBron has one, but like beyond an all-time great that's in their 40s, I'm not sure there will ever be a no trade clause again. It just doesn't make sense. I look at Anthony Edwards in Minnesota and I'm like, that's the only situation where I'm like, maybe they'd do it. Maybe they'd do it in this case. But other than that, I get why they don't want it.
Yeah, it was the total non-starter, and now the problem too is just they don't want the salary either, and they also you had Hero has obviously taken a step this year, which makes Beal
he's been
less
awesome.
necessary.
Yeah.
So I mean, Hero's been better than Beal, so it's hard to make an argument, and I don't really know what the fit between the two of them would be in the backcourt anyway. But I can tell you, they've never been so solid about anything, in that they're not trading for Bradley Beal. Like there is, if they do that, I seriously, I'm following the podcast because that will stun me if they
Yeah.
do it. And it does feel to me, I compared the situation with Bradley Beal to, I don't know if you've seen the movie Office Space.
Oh yeah.
Okay, Milton and the Stapler. I mean, it feels like they're now. Of course, Milton burned down the factory or the
Yeah.
office, so we don't
Well,
want that to happen.
well,
Well,
they are
kind
the
of. Well,
Suns are
that's
the
what
11th
Jimmy's doing
seed.
here. Yeah, that's what Jimmy's doing here
Yeah.
actually. So they didn't really take his stapler away. He
I
just
should
wanted
mention
a more expensive stapler.
I should mention there's just these weird connections that keep coming up with Chicago.
Yeah,
Uh and
Philly.
I
Well, it's
don't
Philly, right?
Billy, and but is that it? Why would they want Bradley Beal and Zach LaVine? Would Bradley Beal be willing to play on a team that's not trying to compete for an NBA title? There's a lot of reasons why it wouldn't work potentially, but there's just it's things that come up. Like originally, Dwayne Rankin, who's a reporter for
Right.
AZ Central here in Phoenix, reported that the Suns were talking to Chicago about Vucevic, which was
Uh-huh.
already weird because the Suns are a second apron team. They have no salary that they could send for Vooch except for one
Right.
of the big three. And this was before any of the Jimmy Butler stuff started. So there already was some conversations early on a few weeks ago there. And it doesn't really make sense that existed outside of any other context than Bradley Beal at this point. So there was something there at some point, and I'm not sure if that's something that could come to fruition, but it keeps coming up.
Well, Chicago's one of the teams we discussed. We did a big podcast on the potential three-way trades, and one of them was Chicago. But we were talking Vucevic, we were talking Levine.
Yeah.
I know that the Heat have always liked Lonzo, who's now back healthy. But again, I don't know what they're going to do with him up there at this stage. But it just doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't feel like they've been in on Levine at all, even though Levine has done this year what the
Yeah.
Heat wanted Jimmy to do. What he wanted Jimmy to do, which is play
And
and play
raise your trade
well.
value. Yeah.
Precisely. So,
Yeah.
but it does not seem, and there was some reporting today by somebody who I guess used to co-host with Durant. Is that right? On
Oh,
podcasts, and he talked about,
Banksy Eddie is his
yeah,
name. Yeah.
right. And there was something to the effect of the Heat not being interested in what Chicago and Milwaukee were offering. Now, I know that at least as of 2 hours ago, which is the last time I got any information on this, they haven't gotten any offer they like. And I don't think they're just saying that to raise value. There's like nothing that's even been brought up to, the whole way. Like I know there was some speculation that they were close on something with Memphis. but they weren't. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think people speculated that because then it came out right after that that
Jimmy said
that
no.
Jimmy
Yeah.
wouldn't go to Memphis, right? So it
Yeah.
seemed like because it's just lobbing leverage plays
Of
back and forth.
course.
But
Yeah.
in this case, I don't think anything has been close. I mean, they've been offered contracts they don't want, basically. And I don't know. And Chicago again, Levine is kind of it's kind of an in between because the player could be worth it, but the history suggests he's not, and I know the Heat are trying to protect, obviously, not going to the second apron, also protect 2026. So, in terms of being active that summer. All right, a couple more things. Where was we on the other side of this? I'll just do some rapid fire with Michael. We appreciate him joining us. You can follow him at Protected Pick. Want to tell you about another great sponsor of the Five Reasons Sports Network, our friends over at Better Edge. Use the code 5RSN at Better Edge. That's the number 5RSN. You get $20 to play right away. This is the legal sports marketplace, not books, sports marketplace in the state of Florida that you don't have to pay a VIG. And you can find the line that you want. Plus, you can join our contest. Go to betteredge.com today. 5RSN. Just give it a shot. Get $20 to play and go ahead with it. Again, it's the number 5RSN, betteredge.com. Also, they're going to have an app out soon too, so you'll be able to download that and go on it immediately. I saw another report today. We're here back with Michael Vigil. There's
Hmm.
another report today. And maybe it was also Bansky, that the Suns were willing to go 3 years, $110 million, and that just jumped out at me because that's the number that somebody at the Heat threw at me a couple weeks ago. Um, and I just this is what's so confusing to me about the Jimmy situation, and I want to pivot to what you think of the way he's handling this and whether you, as an observer of the Suns, think that this would be a good fit for their culture right now, or
Not
you
sure what
just
that
think
is,
that.
but yeah.
Well, right. Well, the Heat have one
Yeah.
supposedly, but and Jimmy was a big part of it, and even no matter how many concessions they made to him, concessions they did not make to LeBron, Dwayne, Shaq, Bosh, Dragic, Hardaway, or Mourning, all of their Hall of Famers or near Hall of Famers. Um, they made concessions to Jimmy, stay at a separate hotel, all the rest of this stuff, and he still got in his feelings, I guess, about Pat's comments, and then additionally, mostly about the money. Um, and wanting to be paid, basically for what he's done so far. But the number that was, it's funny because the Heat, when I was discussing this with people there, they're like, look, just play out the season, okay? And after that, we'll sit down. That was their intent, okay? Now I guess think trust is broken down here, but that was their intent, was to sit down with him, and at that point they could offer him 3 years, maybe not the money he wants per year, but something in the 110 range. I thought maybe you would end up hammering it out at 125, something along those lines. It's not going to get there now because I can't see any scenario where there's an extension. I mean, Jimmy could opt in, which is the one thing we talked about would make the Heat uncomfortable at this stage, I think, if he's just going to opt in after this season. As you look at it for the Suns right now, do you think that like 3 for 110? Because it seems like he might take a deal that he knows is there from the Suns that at this point he would not take from the Heat, or he
Right.
doesn't know is going to
Right.
be offered from the Heat. Do you think that 3 for 110 it would put the Suns in good position?
I I think that if you were to canvas Suns fans at this point, because of the way this season has played out, I think you would find that the fan base is pretty split on yes, do this right away, no question, and blow the whole team up, just trade everyone, try to get your picks back, kind of situation. Which I understand they've been that much of a disappointment, and teams that are good are so far ahead of them so far this season. I think that the solution of Matt Ishbia right now being throw more money at it continues to be in line with everything that he's done since he
Right.
purchased the Suns. There seems to be just no limit to how much he's willing to invest in this team so far. As a mortgage guy, we'll see if any dip in the interest rates will change how much money he wants to put towards this
Right.
team going
Right.
forward. But right now, he's just going to continue to throw more and more money at the team and see if that fixes the problems. I think that when you look at the future going forward beyond this season, tying up a major amount of your salary with two guys that are 35, 36 years old and trying to figure out how long you can compete is a scary prospect no
who
matter
both
what.
had recent injury histories too. I mean,
Recent injury,
Jimmy's is more of an availability issue with a bunch of nagging stuff, but it's the ankle, it's the knee. I mean, he's missed time for a variety of things. I know Kevin's have been more
yeah,
serious at times, but
and been
um,
relatively healthy on the Suns, actually.
right,
KD so far, but I do think that both of those guys have also had exits from teams that weren't always the best situation. And I think
right,
particularly with Jimmy, if you just look at the history of his time in the NBA, it's just a matter of time. Like every team he's on, it's just a matter of time before he becomes upset, and you have to figure out a way uh, to move him. So for the Suns, there is some level of prolonging the inevitability of having to maybe reset in the future. And I think for me and a lot of Suns fans who've watched the entirety of Devin Booker's career, there's a really complex situation there of, do you have to do this to keep Devin Booker and keep him happy? Or is doing this what's going to result in Devin Booker needing to be traded in the future, because that's the only lever they have to pull to reset the team? And that's a
right,
really complex situation, I think, that we have to look at. But if there's any belief, and this is the trouble with the second apron at this point, and probably why Miami is so afraid of adding additional salary, right? Because
yep.
staying away from that as much as possible is, if there is any belief that they still have enough flexibility to attempt to win a title before KD or Jimmy fall apart, then I think that's the only reason that you would attempt to do this. And I think that shows a lot of faith in the fit, which I do think he would. I do think he would be a good fit on this team going forward. I don't think they should start Tyus in that place, but that's a different, question to be answered later if it ever happens.
Right.
I personally, if I'm looking at it from my perspective, I don't have a ton of faith that you can win a title. Like, I'm staring down the barrel of OKC right now, and then of course the future of Wembanyama. Who knows what that's going to
Yep.
look like in the West? So you really would have to capitalize basically next season, and that's just a
That's
really
what I was
short
gonna.
window.
Okay. Well, that's what I was gonna ask you, and then I'll ask you the one final question, which is about more related to the way Jimmy's handled this. But I mean, this is a lost year anyway, right?
It
Like,
feels like it.
even
Yeah.
right? I mean, even if you get
They have the
Jimmy now,
worst
like,
center rotation in the NBA right now. The
right,
Suns do. So I don't know how you can fix that after trading everything for Jimmy.
right, and I mean, with as many teams as there are in the West that they'd have to jump, and then you mentioned OKC, and then Denver makes a move, they're right back in it. I mean, there's a lot of teams that have some flexibility and motivation. Memphis is going to be difficult to deal with, and they look motivated to improve. I mean, I don't, and Houston is I mean, again, if they decide to trade one or two of their young players to get better, it's been
Yeah.
interesting to me that, and it's probably been interesting to Jimmy and his camp, that nobody else seems interested in him.
Yeah.
I mean, like, maybe Memphis was, and that's why again I doubt this thing about this is about winning, because I actually think he'd be the best fit on Memphis. I can see the fit on Phoenix, but I think Memphis he'd
Yeah.
be ideal.
Well, Memphis is
Um,
just better right now. So, I mean,
right,
from the
right.
perspective of winning, they're a better team. So, yeah.
Right, and I think his fit with Ja personality wise would probably work, and I think that that's. But again, it seems like this is to me, and from the out, I can tell you this is what the Heat think. They think that basically it was communicated to Jimmy that this is the one team that would give him the extension, and
It's money.
that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's all this is. And there was this thing today that came out about how, and this is, look, I know he loved Max Strus. Okay, he did, and I mean, everybody loved Max. And PJ Tucker, he didn't want PJ to go, and he likes these get out of the mud type guys, right?
Yeah.
And so there was a report that one of his frustrations was that his guys, okay, I don't know if it was Stein who reported this, were all let go. Caleb Martin, too. Although the Heat made a ridiculously outsized offer to Caleb Martin, which they shouldn't have made, and his agent made a mistake, basically
Right.
turned it down. They told him not to come back 24 hours later because they couldn't do it again. He came back 24 hours later, and he ended up taking half the money in Philadelphia.
Mm.
So as they tried with Caleb and Kyle, it's a whole nother story, because that never should happen in the first place, probably, and that was something that Jimmy wanted. So it was interesting today, because it was like he once wanted all these out of the mud type guys to stay, these role players, but I thought it was that he wanted stars. Well, it couldn't be both. Like, you couldn't pay Max Strus $66 million or whatever, 63 million, which is what he got from Cleveland, and still be able to make those moves. And Yeah. So there's a lot of contradiction in all this stuff, and I think the only thing it really is about is money. And I guess we'll close here. I mean, again, I don't want to be parochial here because the Heat make mistakes, okay? But I've covered them since 1996, and it's all the same damn people because they do have a stability to their organization. I think JJ could probably tell you that too.
Yeah.
Um, they're not an organization, and I know Shaq had some issues in the end. People are gonna say LeBron left and Dwayne, the contract stuff. But like somebody like going rogue like Jimmy has gone to this degree, especially when they've catered to him in a way they've catered to nobody else. I mean, this is different. And it kind of feels like he's trying to go Minnesota Jimmy, but he ain't Minnesota anymore. And so they basically said, you know what? I mean, whatever. We'll hold you. We'll hold you through the trade deadline. We'll hold you to the end of the season. We'll take the cap. We'll take not the cap space, but the flexibility if you leave. Does it give you any pause? Like, I guess this would be the question. Like Jimmy coming in there, like you said, there's a time,
Yes. Yeah.
right? They said,
Yeah, it
like,
definitely does. Yeah.
I
It's
mean,
it's
if he
it's a
does this to
unique situation.
Spo, is he
Yeah.
going to do it to Bud? I would assume he'd do it to
No,
Bud then too, right? I mean,
absolutely. I think we're in a situation as Suns fans, as people who want this team to win. Because I obviously I cover the team, but I do it from a fan's perspective. I want them to
right,
win. Like I'm not
right,
making any qualms about that. So from the perspective of me wanting them to win, I think that we're just in massive risk territory. But the problem I
right,
think that maybe would be a little harder for Heat fans to understand, or people who are listening to this, is that the Suns have been awful this year. So
right,
like we're also
right.
coming at it from a perspective
Sure.
of just do anything to this team to make it watchable
I
again.
picked
Make
you
it
guys for the Western Conference Finals. Trust me. I don't know. I saw you get Tyus and Monte Morris, and I'm like, oh, they actually have actual low turnover point guards now. I thought it was going to work. So
I did,
I'm,
and there is
you
elements
know,
that work, but yeah, the
right,
entire whatever it is, the concoction, and I don't know, maybe there's an element of Durant trying to get his way here too. I have no idea, but it's
right,
currently not working. That's
right.
what I'm seeing right now. So from the perspective of that, and I do think there's a little bit of, if you have to blow it up later, wouldn't you rather have Kevin Durant on a 2 year extension beyond this year instead of just that 1 year? And you're in
Yeah.
the situation, to be honest, that the Heat are in right now with
Right.
a lame
Right.
duck player trying to trade him for anything at the last minute. So even if you do have to pull the trigger later and blow it all up, maybe it would be better to have guys on longer term contracts that you can get a little bit more,
Makes sense.
from that perspective.
All right. Well, we appreciate you joining us. You can follow him at Protected Pick. We'll see if Jimmy comes out with orange hair. He can't say his daughter told him to do it this time because we obviously know it's coded. Friday night's going to be very interesting down here, so we'll see what happens there. They're gonna tell him yeah, come back, and we're gonna see what he does. I feel like the only thing he can really do if he's unhappy is play so he gets paid, but then sort of quiet quit on the court and force the Heat to prove it. Like I don't know what's gonna happen, but that seems like an option here. I don't know. None of this is pretty at the moment. Michael, we appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining, and we'll see if Bradley Beal ends up in Miami. Like I say, you can have my podcast because at that point I would have been wrong about everything. Thank you, Michael.
Yep. Thank you.